Okay, hello. Welcome to the CDR British Soul panel at the We Are Here virtual festival. Hello, August 2020. My name is Tony Wachiku. I'm a producer and educator and head up CDR. And for the next 60 minutes or so, I will explore career, identity and heritage with our super panel of artists and producers. Recent events have brought unprecedented worldwide attention to the systemic challenges of Black people have faced for generations. There is also a unique British Black experience to this, of course, especially within the music industry. Let's delve in for the lens of those who create every day. I'm going to introduce our panel, if they say a little bit about themselves and their connection to music, kicking off with George.
Hi, my name is George Riley. I'm 23 years old. I sing, I sometimes produce. I graduated from university last year. I actually studied philosophy and politics, so not music at all. So I guess this year has just been me testing the waters. So I'm just at the beginning of my journey.
Cool. Lynda?
Hey everyone, I'm Lynda Dawn. I'm a singer, songwriter, producer from London, and I make soul music heavily influenced by boogie, funk and jazz from the 70s and 80s. Yeah. And I released my debut EP last year.
Nice one. And last but not least, the Mykaell Riley himself.
My name is Mykaell Riley. I started before half the panel was born, I guess. Dare I say it. I've been artist, producer, manager, now academic. I started in a band called Steel Pulse a very long time ago and progressed through various bands, stages of production, moving into management, and eventually academia, where I now reside. I'm director of the Black Music Research Unit at the University of Westminster, and I head up a project titled Bass Culture, which is the largest project looking at the impact and legacy of Jamaican music in Britain. That'll do for now.
Illustrious. So hey, listen, I'm guessing, we all had aspirations for a career in music when we were younger, right? Tell us, what was your understanding of the music industry when you were, say, 17 or 18 years old, and what supported this view? Maybe, Mykaell, you can kick us off with yours.
Sorry, I'm going back in time. It takes me a while because it's a long time. I don't think it's any different for any 17-year-old, because you think you know a lot about the industry. You have an aversion to any advice coming from anyone older than yourself. You're challenging the scene, whatever the scene is, to come up with something different. You want to own what you create, and you want to connect with your age group. And you exist in a bubble where you have your own language, your own vernacular, your own preferences and so forth. And, I was no different. It's just a different time period. And the same challenge existed, in terms of parental perspectives. My parents at the time, I couldn't mention, in fact, I didn't mention I was in a band until after we signed the contract. The whole time I'm sneaking off to do rehearsals, to be part of the band. I've got an apprenticeship that I have to pass at the same time, but the calling was music, and it was relentless and powerful, and I had no choice. That's how it felt. I'm going with every fiber of my makeup, but I had to be smart about it, because back then in the 70s, I'm first generation Black British born. The Jamaican parentage was hardcore. We've not come over to have you fail. We've not paid that passage, worked in the snow to have you failed, and you have to do something serious. And music was just not considered serious, certainly not for certainly not the case for young Black males. It was not a career pathway that parents supported.
Mm-hmm. Lynda, what about you?
Yeah, I feel similarly. I mean, I was raised in a Nigerian household,
Mm-hmm.
but I was born in London, and my mom was definitely she didn't think music was a serious career to take.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted me to be like a lawyer or
doctor, lawyer, engineer,
or something like serious where there's like a stable like source of income. My dad, I guess he was also a guitarist. He was a musician as well, so I guess he understood me a bit more. But
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely that sense of worry, like, you know, they didn't want me to kind of get lost trying to seek for fame. And yeah, I guess at that time I was definitely a lot more naive and gullible, and I also thought I knew it all. And I was actually raised in the church. That's kind of where my spiritual education like kind of comes from, also my musical identity. So
Mm-hmm.
when I was 13, my mom knew I wanted to sing, but I was super shy. So she dragged me along to church and she forced me to join the church choir amongst like all the aunties and uncles and like seasoned musicians and seasoned vocalists. And that was definitely like, that was amazing for me because I was just like a sponge. I just soaked up so much and I was able to learn about projecting and harmonies. And yeah, it was an amazing source of education for me. But I guess I kind of left church at the age of 18 and I was like, right, I know what I'm doing now. I get it. Like, and I guess I thought my trajectory would be a lot more linear. Like I'm A, I need to get to B, and it shouldn't be that difficult. I should just be able to achieve it in about a year or so. And yeah, life isn't that straightforward, and neither was my journey in music. So there was definitely a lot more like meanders. And I guess at the age of 18, yeah, I started, I guess I started off professionally in music, doing like backing vocals as like a session BV. And then that kind of led me into doing a lot of songwriting as well, top line and kind of like behind the scenes for other artists and labels. And yeah, my journey was, it took a long time for me to get to where I am now. And it was definitely a journey of self-discovery as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
George, about you?
Yeah, I feel like very similarly to Lynda. I felt like at 16, it will just happen. Like if you're talented, it will just magically, you'll just do it and be successful. I didn't really realize the work that you have to put in on your craft, but not only that, your network, who you know, all of that kind of thing. And it's funny listening to my dad because he's saying a lot of things about his parents, but I probably felt more similarly about his outlook, very much so, because I always kind of hid my music from my dad because I was not like hid it, but like he was always like, it's very hard.
Yes, of course.
Very hard. People are snakes. You'll get burned. And I was like, because I think I wanted to go to Brit school when I was like 16, and then kind of convinced otherwise. I ended up going down the university route and not studying music at all. And although I continued doing music that whole time, I guess I just, yeah, it's definitely been a journey of me figuring out exactly what I want from it. And actually I'm happier now to come into it at this later stage, knowing myself, knowing what I want. And I think having built on my abilities as well to the point where I'm actually ready to embark on a career in it, I guess.
I hear that. So with you, Georgia, has there been a point where, you know, your creative output and your music and industry, you know, wider industry have connected? Has that happened, and how did it happen?
Well, I guess it's happened quite slowly. There's been a few people, like industry people, who get into contact. Like I had someone, I won't name, who's like, yes, you can be Rihanna. I will sign you for your whole life and take 30% of everything that you are and will ever do forever. And that was probably like, 2 years ago. And I think probably quite a lot of people, young people who are embarking on music have a similar experience with someone who tries to kind of like poach you at like an impressionable stage in your career. And then I guess it's just been really organic. Like as I've just been meeting more musicians, getting more involved in a musical community, things have just kind of come about really naturally. And yeah, it feels just like it's reached its stage almost on its own. I mean, I'm definitely going out and seeking out those opportunities, but it hasn't felt forced.
I hear that. Lynda, what about yours? I mean, you talked a little bit about, you know, cutting your teeth as a backing vocalist, writing top line. At what point has it, you know, been a little bit more about you as a artist?
Yeah, so I actually did a lot of songwriting for a couple of years, and I think, to be honest, I just kind of wanted to keep busy, and I guess I thought I could feel better just by making music, even though it wasn't music that I necessarily wanted to make. I felt like I had to keep my foot in the door and, you know, keep networking, and hopefully one day I'll be able to make music that I want to make. And yeah, it did take a lot of self-discovery, and eventually I was just feeling not very like fulfilled. Like I didn't feel like I was actually like pursuing my purpose. I felt like I was just kind of going along with emotions and just jumping through hoops. And you know, similarly to what George was saying, like, you know, people kind of saying, we want you to trying to put me into boxes, like make a song like what Rihanna would do, or make a song like this, which is just really soul draining as an artist. I mean, just like, copy what other people are doing, it's just not very inspiring. So after a couple years of doing that, I don't know what happened. One day I just kind of shut down, and I was just like, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. And I think a lot of people around me thought I was being crazy because I was just turning down opportunities left, right, and center. And yeah, I just kind of actually stopped doing music for a little bit.
Okay.
Because I felt pretty disillusioned. And it was just like the people around me. Like, I think it's really important in that if you're an artist to have like a really strong support system, whether it's like one person or like a community of people. And it was actually the closest people to me who kind of encouraged me to just, I guess, like dig within to find out what kind of artist I am, what kind of content I want to create. And yeah, it turned out that it wasn't really mainstream, and I was writing quite a bit of mainstream music, but what I wanted to do was the complete opposite of that.
Got you.
Yeah, and I guess I'm quite eclectic, so I need to really figure out what my style was as an artist and who I wanted to be in the music that I wanted to make. I kind of had to narrow that down. And then, yeah, it was basically my brother who helped produce my EP, and my partner. So just a really small circle of family who know me and like understand my vision and help me create that. So I think I'm very blessed to have had that support system around me.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Mykaell, what's your connection? When did your apprenticeship tour, you know, rehearsing, you know, start to be recognized by industry?
I think it's different because firstly, I was not in London, the capital of business and enterprise, if you like. If you're 100 miles down the road and going back to the 70s, you might as well almost been on Mars. You had to create a profile locally first. We didn't have internet, we didn't have mobile phones or anything like that. So it meant that your first community was the band, and you couldn't do it on your own. There was no tech. You needed people, is the big difference. So if you thought band, or you thought I'm an artist, you instantly thought a group of people, and you had to seek them out, or they found you. So it's a very different experience in that context, because you had to become part of a unit. And once you're part of that unit, again, the whole time frame is different, because back then you signed a deal for 5 years and everything was thought of in 3 to 5 years. If you signed a single deal, it might not come out for a year. It's very different. And an album would come out perhaps at the end of that year that you've signed, or even 2 years into your contract. So a very different timescape was in place. And it meant that when you thought of being part of a band, you thought in a different length of time. So it meant that you'd rehearse for a year before presenting to even a label or management. You had to get to the point where you were, well, almost semi-professional. And you also had to have amassed an audience, analog style, which meant you went out and you gigged and you rehearsed in front of an audience. And that audience was your barometer to say, it's good, it's bad, keep your day job, whatever. And in our case, the first audience was a Jamaican audience, which was hardcore, absolutely hardcore. I mean, you literally took your facial features. I was going to say, how do I put this? If they didn't like you, you'd be bottled, okay? And this is not a punk audience. This is an audience that is saying at the time, there's a sound system playing, the band comes on and it disrupts the sound system. You almost had to be interchangeable with the sound system. And what that meant was you practice all the songs that were being played by the DJ. If he was dubbing a song at the time, you dubbed live that song. And it meant that you became really good imitators. And that at that point, you were judged. If you were able to go on stage, perform a song, the audience not even realize it's not the song, it's not the artist on stage, you were good. And that was a hard school. It meant we rehearsed all the hits and you'd insert one of your own songs into that performance. And you'd hope they wouldn't notice.
I hear that.
And if you came off stage and no one screamed at you, that was a success. It's a very different time frame.
Most definitely.
And at that point, you know, you thought maybe we should look for a manager. Very different time period.
So back then, particularly with all this schooling and grafting, doing these gigs, you know, were you aware of any, you know, racial barriers to your progress and the potential of your development at that time?
Are you kidding? This is the 70s, mate.
Enlighten us.
I mean, it's funny looking back because you've got Black Lives Matters like a few weeks ago, and jumping back a few decades, and you think, what is the difference? The difference was you kind of knew it was there because it was in your face. You stepped out your gate, and you had white youth in the form of skinheads that were part of a group or political party, the National Front or the BNP, that was just looking for the odd black person. I say the odd, it wasn't the odd, it was anyone they found on the street that wasn't in a group. And they just attack you and beat you up. It was literally, there was no question about it. You would plan to go out with a number of other of your peers, and you'd go out in a group formally for protection. If you were heading to a club or a venue and someone didn't turn up, the first place you went was to the local police station. It was that straightforward. Let's go to police. He might have been picked up. And if you were picked up by the police, you'd have been beaten up. So jump forward to the idea of a record deal or record contract. You know, these are back in the days where if you saw someone, a black person on TV, you spoke about it the next day. Did you see X on the TV? In terms of artists, we had one main program, and that was Top of the Pops. And that was your reference point. And the music we were making, we were not making to be on Top of the Pops. Our reference points were quite narrow. I was in a reggae band. Our reference was Bob Marley. That was the most successful act. Other than that, it might have been Aswad, who was the only reggae band at the time, British reggae band, to sign a major contract. In terms of labels, we weren't looking for loads of labels even. It was Island Records. That's it. Maybe Virgin. And then everything was down a lesser label from that point. And it meant you were competing with the very best artists in order to get that deal. Very, you know, every time I think about it, the challenge, I'd like to say it was more difficult, but it was very, very different to what it is now. And in terms of that deal and the relationship in the record companies, we understood that there was only room for one act. That was it. Could we be that act?
Mm.
And it was made absolutely clear from the press. You didn't see any bands like us in the press. It was not played on radio, just pirate stations and sound systems. And there were no really skilled managers within the community. Everyone was a hustler.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it was very clear, you're going to be ripped off. The only question was how much. And then lastly, it was how long could you survive this before you had to take up a job? So everyone had a job because music just didn't pay.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. George, what's your take on, the awareness of any kind of, barriers because of how you look,
Well, I think it seems, obviously it's just a completely different time, but to me it seems quite obvious to anyone paying attention that colorism is just such a big issue in the industry still. I mean, when you go on Instagram, it does seem to me that only lighter skinned women get the airtime or get like propelled, let's say, or uplifted
mm-hmm.
by media and everything else. And I guess I've just been quite conscious of that. I don't know whether you'd say the same, Lynda, of how like my music will be perceived given my mixed identity and the way that I look. Mm-hmm. So I think it was just also in terms of like deals, all of that kind of thing, it just is definitely so different because it's so oversaturated now. Anyone can get Instagram, get TuneCore, distribute your music themselves, which is exactly what I've done. And I feel like labels aren't giving out those big deals to everyone at all. It's kind of like maybe you get £5,000, £10,000 here to like propel the little piece that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they help you a little bit for that period, but they've also got another 15 artists that they're doing the same thing with. So you don't really get the attention that maybe you would have done back then. So yeah.
I hear that. Lynda, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I haven't personally, I don't know of any instances where I've, experienced any discrimination and that's kind of held me back in music. Mm-hmm. And I think touching on what George said, colorism is definitely a thing, it's definitely an issue. And I think people who are more racially ambiguous or fairer skinned
mm-hmm.
are kind of put on a pedestal because I guess they're seen kind of more palatable to the mainstream, like wider audience. So I'm definitely aware of my own privileges that I have as a British born Nigerian woman, but of mixed heritage as well. But yeah, I can't tell you of any situations where I've experienced any discrimination based on my heritage. I mean, I don't know if there's been kind of conversations like behind closed doors, but there hasn't been any like in your face racism that I've ever experienced. So I guess that I can kind of attest that to my own privilege.
I hear that. But do you think that one's heritage, particularly black British heritage, can compromise one's progress? And if so, by whom and how?
Well, that's a tough one. I don't know. Like, could you explain a bit more what you mean by that question?
Like I said, I think what I'm trying to get at is whether or not the way someone looks, the way someone is, their heritage, black, being black and British, and wanting to be an artist and musician, does that hinder your progress? It's like straight up question.
Right. I mean, I think it varies for every individual, but I definitely think on the whole, yeah. And I think based on just appearance alone, the more non-Western you look, the more ethnic you look, I think that can definitely work against you if you want to break into the mainstream. I think if you just look at British soul music as a whole, I think it's fair to say that the most popular soul artists to come from Britain may not be of African heritage or Caribbean heritage, like the Adeles and the Amy's. Not to say that they're not talented and they don't deserve what they've achieved, but they were able to kind of break the glass ceiling and like propel to a whole different kind of status than a lot of Black artists have been able to for the genre of music that is theirs.
Sure thing. What's your take on this, Mike?
Well, just responding to Lynda, I would say they don't have a glass ceiling. The glass ceiling is on this side of the fence. It's not something they have to break through, is the first point, which means it's a far easier passage. Secondly, they're standing on the shoulders of every single Black soul, R&B, jazz, reggae, whatever you want to call it, Black music artist, which has done the work for them. Those artists from the Black community have forged the pathway, developed the various genres, scenes, and whatever, that have allowed these artists to have a platform, a musical platform. Furthermore, I was in a press office a very long time ago, and the head of the press office said to me, look, what you need to understand about promoting music and an audience is that an audience buys into an image of themselves. So the instant you have an artist that looks like the audience, that can communicate a music from wherever, it's more likely that that audience will buy into that music. So if you have a format that the audience is already enamored with, that they already like, and it really doesn't matter what area of Black music you want to bring to the table, if that artist, that white artist, is able to communicate that music in a way that, if you were blindfolded, just for example, you'd ask a question, is that a Black artist? If the artist is able to do that, they will be successful because they're not crossing over. They're simply appealing to an audience that looks like themselves. Switch the lights on and you see it's a white artist, that is a bonus for that individual, because the question then to the general community and the media is, oh my God, that white artist sounds so good. And what they're really saying is they sound Black, right? For a Black artist to sound Black, it's not a bonus. It's expected. It's normal. You don't get any extra props for being in tune or hitting the notes, or necessarily being good. It's expected of you. And that might sound odd, but in an industry where it's so competitive, that is really an important edge, or disadvantage, depending on how you want to look at it. And so we're in an industry that has learned not to come out and say things bluntly. We want the culture. We like the entrepreneurial inventiveness that comes out of the Black music community. We just don't necessarily want you. And that means at any given point, it's a limited number of artists that are able to make that ascent. And then you look at the size of the industry and you say, how comes so much money has been made out of this culture? And so few artists seem to have a really meaningful career. What is happening behind the scenes? And I think more artists need to ask that question, and get smart about the idea of having a career, because it's not a level playing field. It never has been. That's just from my perspective, and my experience, delusional. For all artists, Black or white, it's delusional. But I think if you're a Black artist, it's delusional on a whole different level.
So given the economic landscape of the music industry and, the opportunities of online and the opportunities of tapping into services, is there a way of kind of looking at ways to address this disconnect between the contribution that British Black artists and producers have made to contemporary music, and to the face of, I'm not saying the face physically, but the face culturally of mainstream music? Is there a way of addressing this? Whoever wants to answer that or respond to that.
Giving people back their masters. Did you see that Deval Timothy video?
Talk us through it.
It's called Slaves. and it's a stop motion music video, and it's about an artist writing a song and giving away the masters and kind of ending up in this like modern slavery situation between the artist and the label. And I think it has made me think a lot about whether there is more power in being independent these days. How far can you go being independent? Does the label have less power? I don't know.
A good example would be Prince.
Mm.
You know, if you look at Prince and what happened to him in his relationship with his label, and his label holding on to his content, and him changing his name to Symbol, all in an effort just to be the artist, just say, look, I created this stuff. I mean, it's difficult because all contracts are complicated, and as you move through time, you feel different about a contract you might have signed a few years ago. But the principle is, once you sign these deals, the companies own you and they own your artistic output. And in terms of challenging these companies, which are global conglomerates, and you relate that question to British artists, and in particular British Black artists, it's a challenging one, because no matter how big you are, the global conglomerates are bigger. And if you're looking at distribution, at some point, you'll see that all those artists that set up to be independent, to have a 360 control of their creativity and their merchandise and everything else, they somehow, just at their peak, sign a major contract. And you say, why have you done that? Why? And one of the responses to that is they recognize, one, if I want to be really global, I need access to the global networks in a way that I don't have if I don't sign. And secondly, I think they realize the fragility of their own careers. Most careers are only 3 to 5 years. You peak and you burn out, right? And they've made some money and they get nervous about their longevity, and they say, do you know what? I can squeeze some more money out of a label and move on. But does it change anything? And the answer is, every time that happens, the answer is no, quite frankly. It hasn't changed, arguably, since the birth of popular music, or pop music more, because that's kind of 59, 60. It hasn't changed. And so there is a battle going on for creative control, and it's still going on. And I think amongst Black British artists, we're moving into a new stage where young musicians understand more about their industry at an earlier stage, and they're understanding more about the impact on the Black artists as opposed to a white artist. They're understanding those nuances at an earlier stage in their career. So with that in mind, it is hopeful. And again, within labels, we have young entrepreneurs going into labels with an understanding of the challenge of Blackness within an institution. And that is helpful. And most recently, institutions have been challenged through Black Lives Matters to focus on this inequality. So again, it's hopeful. If you ask me if I think it's going to change, I just say I'd like to be hopeful at this point.
I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, I'm really glad that you alluded to this idea of kind of, Black entrepreneurship, particularly in the music space, but I think that the thing about that is it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, there is this fantastic opportunity to find one's own identity as a music producer, artist, etc., and find an audience on your own terms, etc., etc. But that's all done with your own personal labor, right? And I think the other side of it is the fact that there is still an industry out there that does invest in artists and does invest in the future of artists, and there seems to be a disconnect between the fantastic entrepreneurship that's happening in the Black music space and those institutions and those companies that could invest, right? And we've seen this time and time again, with the evolution of different scenes and genres. If it was happening with, white-led artists or white scenes, things would accelerate in a much quicker way. So with that all said, I think looking at, the British Black experience, how do you think it differs from, you know, other Black people around the world? I mean, it's obviously different, but in terms of the progression of British Black music, British Black artistry, how can it push forward? How is it different, and how can it be pushed forward and maintain its own identity?
Ooh, I'll let one of the young people answer that.
Let's go with Georgie. What are you saying? What do you think?
Well, from where I stand, I think it's moving into quite an interesting space. I feel like Black British artists are recognizing their own power and authenticity and celebrating it in a way that I don't think has been celebrated in the past. I would say, I think that it seemed before it was maybe not easier, but maybe you were accepted if you were doing a more American-centric version of what you actually wanted to make. And now having your own accent, having a London accent, being yourself, I think is something that people actually want and are craving in a time where all this like fakeness, fake energy, influencer culture, I think it's kind of hopefully dying a death, and people actually want to see authenticity and genuine people.
I hear that.
Doing their thing.
Lynda?
Yeah, I agree. I think in the past couple of years, you've definitely seen, particularly in Black British music, there's been standing on our own feet and not really looking towards what America is doing or kind of copying what they're doing. In fact, America is definitely looking at what Black British artists are doing for inspiration and for the new wave. So I think we're definitely on the right path. And I think just if we continue to kind of break barriers and also just, you know, we've definitely found our own voice now. And yeah, I think we're definitely on the right path.
Cool. So I guess there is merit to being British, right?
Yes.
Just to be clear.
No, look, anecdotally, I was working with a master's student a few weeks ago, and the master's student is Korean, and they said, you do realize that we no longer reference America. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, America stagnated about 5 years ago, at least. And the most creative space in Europe is London. And that's why we come to London to study music. And it was interesting coming from someone outside of the UK. And the focus here, in this instance, was to absorb what's happening in London, to take it back to South Asia. And I've had the same conversation or a similar conversation with Chinese artists who've come to study what is happening in the UK, to go back and be creative in China with a new middle-class youth community. And in this instance, this student said to me, look, I'm not interested in breaking into the American industry. If I make 0.000 whatever % in China, I'm bigger than I could be in London and bigger than in America because I'm in China. And what you guys have done is developed a whole cultural thing that we're just coming to terms with. And London is the place to be for that, which, you know, that is powerful to understand the mindset of someone from outside of the culture coming to London to absorb it. And the other interesting component of that is they said they didn't realize the impact or input of the Black community in popular music until they arrived in London. And that was like really interesting. And I said, why? And they said, well, the way it's promoted to us is very different. There is no link to the Black community often in popular music or pop music that comes out the UK. It's promoted as pop. And most of the protagonists are white British artists. And it's just called pop. It's when they arrive in London, they realize the complex interrelationships between the Black music community and the pop charts. And that's a revelation when they arrive. So that is something else I think that should be in its own way inspirational, in that there is a job of work to be done and an opportunity in that gap, that knowledge gap. And, you know, in terms of markets, China's a pretty big place.
Indeed. I mean, it's with what you've just said, you know, just for clarity, you know, is Black British artistry, the identity, really that important, you know, in this age of kind of mass, you know, blemish global fusions, you know, of genres and culture, you know? I'm really glad you alluded to that point. It seems like it is, but maybe, you know, Lynda or Georgie, you can answer this. You know, you obviously are very social media savvy. You look at, you know, I'm assuming you look at Insta and all these platforms, you know, a lot more frequently than say Mykaell does, or even myself. You know, do you think there's a need for there to still maintain an identity, a cultural identity, a Black British identity, or do you think that, you know, it's not so important, you know, given how people are influenced from so many different places, and there's this kind of fusion of culture and styles and genre, etc.
I personally, for me, I feel like it is, and to go further than that, I just feel like having just an artistic identity as an artist is really important if you want to make like authentic music. I think that to tell your story as an artist, you kind of have to dig deep and look at your experiences and whether that be your cultural identity as well, to create music that is true and authentic. So, I mean, it can't be forced. Like if some people don't really identify with their heritage, then I would suggest maybe not, you know, going like full, like, you know, promoting where their family's from on their Instagram. And it just has to be, if it means something to you and it's important to you and your art, then absolutely. That's how I see it.
I hear that. Lynda, what do you think?
That was Lynda.
That was me.
Oh, sorry. I'm not on the screen, so I'm just hearing a voice. Sorry, Lynda. Thank you, Lynda. George.
Yeah, I would say, I would just second that and say that something I'm really proud to be part of is the community, and that's something that is quite on display. Like shout out to Giles and Miles at the Room Studios, where I spend a lot of time. But it does feel like everyone knows each other and supports each other, and that is a really important thing to be showcasing as well. And where I kind of wish people knew that there was more support in the community than is actually displayed online, because it can be a very individual endeavor to be, and maybe self-indulgent endeavor, but actually from what I've found, it's been nothing but community and us all kind of trying to uplift each other, and that's something that I hope was more acknowledged.
I hear that. So with that said, you know, what steps can be taken to address, you know, some of the systematic barriers to the music industry, but also, more importantly, systematic barriers to this knowledge gap that Mykaell talked about?
I think a big part of the challenge is networking. It's how musicians, I think, and creatives form groups. And certainly, and I talk with my academic hat on, one of the things we encourage is developing international networks right there within your creative hub. So we will literally place international students in the context or periphery of London-based musicians and say, look, for this project, you guys are going to work together. And it's pretty amazing. What starts off with a pretty fractious, challenging encounter creates or produces some of the most creative outputs and really good relationships at the end of it based on those outputs. And in one context we had, or one encounter, we had Chinese, Korean, Japanese musicians working with London grime musicians, and what they produced, this is student work in their final year, raised £30,000 from a sponsor who said, I like it, I'm going to sign you. and that sponsor was Chinese. And so it's saying, look, you can create an international project just by the people that are involved in that project. You don't have to travel. It's not about travel. It's not about getting on a plane. So even if you got worried about COVID, it ain't about that anymore. You can create an international project just by seeking out those people that come from somewhere else. And one of the reasons they're in London, as I said earlier, is to connect to London. And that for me is really interesting. And I don't like the word even multicultural. I just think it's creatives coming together. And recognizing that the key thing that they want to do is produce something unique, and that's a coming together of all their experiences. And in terms of breaking down that barrier, it's going to be the creatives that are going to break down that barrier. The industry is simply concerned with sales and income and turnover. And I think the new groups, I call it, are formed of different components. And one of those components is, maybe I've got an accountant. He's a member of the group. What does he do? He just makes sure we don't lose out on the financial side. You know, I've got another member of the group, and that person simply deals with press and PR and whatever else, but they're a member of the group. So it's not necessarily about music. I think the new creative teams, if that's the right expression, are recognizing that they have to embrace the key elements of the industry itself in order to survive. And I think the community today that's making music is recognizing that. And in terms of the Black community, I think in many cases, they've already recognized that. They've circumvented the industry and said, you know what, we know that we're going to have a hard time trying to fit in. So we're not going to try and fit in. We're just going to try and survive. And that means they've embraced everything from sponsorship to setting up their own shops that sell any number of different items, not necessarily related to music. It's the entrepreneurial, I think, spirit in music that's going to move it forward.
So with that said, do you think that there will be, you know, with this happening, in terms of industry, particularly with, you know, British music industry, I get the sense that apartheid is going to happen, you know, because it feels to me that there's this distinct, you know, line between an industry that is all about pop and the way pop music looks and how it's monetized, and, you know, the cultural innovation and the independence of Black British artists. And it feels to me that there's a divide there. It will make sense when it's about the one, as you said, alluded to it earlier, or that one artist from a particular scene or genre, or that track that does really well and performs. But in a broader scale, there isn't that investment in scenes or collectives or whatever. So it almost feels to me that there will be apartheid. You know, there will be industry that's about money and exploitation of a genre in the guise of pop, and everything else. What do you guys think? Maybe Georgie, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I saw something recently. It was like the stats of who has the top jobs in the industry. And obviously Black women is like, I can't remember what percent, but you can imagine it was like 1% or something really negligible. And after all this time, it just seems like people still aren't getting the jobs, or if they are getting the jobs, they're being brought into an environment that is overwhelmingly white, that kind of stops them being able to make any progress or have any impact. So I think, yeah, there definitely is a divide. And for me, that looks like doing a law conversion, which I'm going to be starting next month, because I'm just thinking, well, knowledge is power. If I'm going to try and exist outside of this, then I need to be clued up on what those challenges are going to be. And what the challenges are going to be for the people around me in my circle as well.
Lynda, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the narrative is definitely very divisive at the moment, and I think the media is kind of like fanning the flames a little bit. And yeah, I do think there's a lot of division in just across the board, politically and in the arts as well, of course. And I guess one good thing to take out of it is, I think in this day and age, artists have a lot more independence and autonomy. And especially with what's happening with COVID, I think people are forced to kind of be more independent and learn how to do things themselves and not rely on institutions so much, or not rely on major labels. Like, you know, I think a lot of artists can do a lot themselves via the power of social media and self PR. And also, as Mykaell said earlier, being able to connect with international audiences, and you can do that on a live on Instagram. You can do it, you know, via a virtual, like, digital festival. So I think that there's a lot that we have at the tips of our fingertips. And yeah, for me, I guess I was really lucky in regards to connecting with international audiences, because my EP was actually released via an LA label, and I didn't like look for that. I assumed that it would be released via a UK label, but it just kind of fell into the hands of Mind Design, who has a record label called Akashic Records. And then, you know, me coming from London, born and raised, my debut EP ended up being released to an LA, California audience first, and then that kind of rippled around the world and came back to the UK. So it just goes to show how easy it is now to connect with audiences who you might have not thought that you could connect with before.
Of course. So I guess what we're saying is, you know, independence is the way forward. You know, knowledge is the way forward. Networks is the way forward. And I guess with industry, the wider industry, it's about partnership, right? Rather than, you know, obviously keeping your masters first and foremost, and allyship, right? And partnership. But this idea that it's not about being in the industry, it's about using the industry as a service. Am I right?
Well, partly because you are in the industry. If you're making music and you're connecting with an audience, you are in the industry. I think what is important is to remember is that the audience, if you can access the audience, that audience is normally quite open to new things. The big question here is access. And the audience, if exposed to new things, will generally are pretty good judges of, you know, quality, and will buy into that. But they tend to select from the choice that they're given. The internet has meant there is more out there, but it's actually so much out there, it's difficult to find stuff. And so for me, the big question is marketing. Do you understand marketing, how it works, how to identify yourself and stand out in a crowded market? Do you understand how to access your audience? If you understand those two things, how to stand out and access your audience, you are powerful. If you can create a narrative that keeps you connected, you will survive. And if you're doing those three things, the majors will chase you, because that is exactly what they would have to do, and you're doing it. And it means that if you're doing those things, you have a better chance of staying independent. When you talk about a divided market, it's really about power and control of the monetary side of the market. And so I think if you're a British musician, you're increasingly attractive to large markets that are saturated with the same thing. And here I'm talking about an American market. The British Black music artist is now quite exotic in America. You're Black, but you're different. You sound different. You communicate your art differently. The culture from which your music is made is different. The experiences that your music is born out of is different, which means in an interview, it's a different story. It's fresh. It looks Black, but it's fresh. And I think that should be empowering. The real question is, how do you get marketed in America? How do you maintain that marketing? And how do you achieve that profile? And the other thing I'd add to that is, people like to put down Africa. Africa is an amazing market to get into. That's why all the major labels are going over and opening up in Africa. So again, I think the global balance for the Black British artists in terms of opportunities is shifting, but the artists have to kind of, I think, upskill themselves in order to exploit those new opportunities.
I would definitely agree with that, and also just say that media is so important. Like, you have to be accepted by those media outlets, because people are sheep at the end of the day, and they don't, it's almost like if you haven't been introduced to someone, for largely this is from what I see, if you haven't been introduced to an artist through channels that you respect, then often that audience won't initially respect or maybe trust that your content is valuable. So I think, yeah, the challenge of PR is definitely really important. You have to be on top of that as an independent artist.
For sure. I mean, you know, the good thing is is that, you know, we've all kind of alluded to in different ways, you know, the whole pandemic and the subsequent experiences that we've had has really opened everyone up to their surroundings, right? Including their practice, whether it's your creative practice or business practice. So, you know, we'd like to think that, and also we've all had to question our identities and, you know, why we do what we do. So it definitely feels that it's been a really good opportunity for all kinds of industry, particularly with components of the music industry that are looking at how to address, you know, a lot of the themes that we talked about today. Before we sign off, I was going to ask if anyone has got any questions or thoughts or comments on what they've heard, if you just want to push it into this chat so we can then share it with our group. But before we conclude, I just wanted to know a couple of things from you guys. You know, what has been the most, you know, striking, you know, thought or image that has come to your mind with what we've talked about? Maybe ask you, Lynda, what has come up for you with what we've talked about?
Many things. I just think realizing the potential that we have as artists, and kind of it dawning that upon us that London is a massive hub and a real source of inspiration for a lot of other musicians around the world right now. So I just think realizing how lucky we are, I guess, to be a part of that community and to really be pioneers. That's definitely something that stuck with me through this conversation, and just realizing, I guess, how powerful we are, as you said, as artists, and how powerful the Black British soul scene is. Yeah.
George?
Yeah, I would say gratitude, definitely. And just being grateful for the community and the power of community, and just power of sticking together, and just being, yeah, we have strength in numbers. And if we can all share that knowledge, and then we can all grow and lift each other up at the same time.
Mike?
I think I'm just really heartened by how articulate young artists today are, and, you know, particularly young artists in the room, and I think astute in the challenges that they have as musicians and creatives, and the worldly overview in terms of the challenges that they have, and ambitions that they have. Back in the day, it was quite narrow. It was, we just want to get a deal, man. Deal, and then buy a house, and then just chill. And then it didn't happen. And then you're completely lost. I think for me, it's heartening to hear young musicians and creatives that have a grasp of what the industry is about, and the challenge that they've taken on, that they've inflicted on themselves. So, you know, I think, yeah, good on you guys. Good luck.
Indeed. So to conclude, yeah, we'll conclude with this, Mykaell. You know, given, you know, your experiences to date, you know, as an artist, as a producer, as a manager, and, you know, especially on today's panel, you know, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self today?
Wow, that's a hard one. I think, don't assume you know everything. The best position is to assume there is more to know, and to take on the role of finding out that which you need to understand. the instant you think you've learned everything there is to know about the industry, and it doesn't matter whether it's producing a song, getting it signed to a label, or promoting it, or touring it, the instant you assume you've arrived, you're at risk of losing it all. And the other thing, you know, I say to my 18-year-old self is, this doesn't last very long. It's just a moment. So what am I going to do in the next moment? And I have to think about, I don't want to say plan B, because that sounds like it's doing something else. But I think you have to think about how you grow what you have. How do you grow it? You know, how does it evolve into something else? Because if you don't, there'll become a point where you write that song and you can't see how to follow it up with another song. You know, so it's a hard one. As a creative, it's keeping your eyes wide open the whole time. And I think that in itself is a challenge, but you know, yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. What say you, Lynda, to your 80-year-old self?
I would say to my 18-year-old self to be fearless and trust in the process and trust in your talent. And you know, it's not going to be easy, but don't let that kind of dissuade you. And you know, don't compare yourself too much to your peers, because that's definitely something that I struggled with when I was young. I was very impatient and was always kind of like, why is this person doing so much better, and why is this so easy for that person? But you know, at the end of the day, we're all on our individual journeys, and you don't know what people are going on, what's going on for people behind the scenes, especially on social media, because it's just everyone kind of like, it's a show reel for everyone, just showing all of their highs, but you don't really see the lows so much. So I think it's just really important to create your own lane, and you know, not trying to please everybody else, because as an artist, for me personally, it took me a while to kind of silence all the voices of everybody else saying you should do this, or trying to put me in this box, or compare me to all these other people. And as I said before, it was a road of self-discovery and realizing what kind of art I wanted to create. So I just think it's important for any young artist right now to, you know, just look within and just kind of figure out what content they want to share with the world, and what their musical identity is. So yeah, and also just have fun with it, because creating art is such a beautiful thing. And I think I was really impatient, so I just wanted to get from A to B, and I think the journey is part of the whole overall experience. So you know, creating art is a beautiful thing, and it doesn't always have to be gloom and doom and anxiety. You know, you can have fun with it.
Most definitely. Yeah. George?
Lynda, you took the words right out of my mouth. I would just say, realize your strength. I feel like as a Black woman making music, you're just always, as you said, put down, put in a box, made to feel like things are really difficult, like they're unattainable. And I just wish I knew then, as you're saying, just like what my strength is, and being unique, being there's only one of me. That is a truth worth telling.
Nice one. So George, Lynda, Mykaell, thank you so much for your time, wisdom, contributions, perspectives on British Soul. This has been the British Soul panel. Thank you for joining us. Hope you find it insightful. Let us know, either on socials or however you want to get to us. Just to give you a heads up, at 8 o'clock, we have the next section of our CDR program further we out here for Virtual Festival, which is OPN, a DJ set of works in progress submitted by you guys, producers, artists in the community. Thanks. See you soon.
Thank you. Can I have your camera?
No.